Hey there everyone, my name is Rob Simonds. I'm the principal second violin of the Rochester Philharmonic. As many of you know, we are canceled. We're not playing any concerts like most of the city. Our doors are closed for the time being. But in the interim, we are doing everything we can to keep this institution whole. Our musicians, our board members, our donors, our audience. But while we're cut off from our audience, which is our absolute lifeblood, our entire reason for being, we at the musicians are going to launch a series called the Living Room Series, where we come from our homes to yours. The Rochester Philharmonic, we perform 38 weeks a year, 5 days, 6 days a week we're on stage together, practicing together and playing concerts for this community. But the lion's share of our work is done in spaces just like this. This is my practice room. And so for the time being, it is my stage. So I'm going to play some solo violin music for you guys tonight. I'm going to start with a work from the mid-90s by a composer from Portland, Oregon named Kenji Bunch. This is Aria by Kenji Bunch. If you guys think anybody at home or someone you know might be interested in this, you could go ahead and tag them in the comments and bring them along. If you have any questions along the way, throw them in the comments, and someone from the other social media folks, Grace and Willa, are back there to answer some questions. And my wife Louise is in the room with me, and I can answer questions that you might have too. The great Canadian pianist Glenn Gould used to talk about having a blind spot from Webern or from Bach to Webern. And we're gonna have a little bit of that tonight. We're gonna have a bit of a blind spot from the 17th century to the 21st century. So I'm going to play two pieces back to back by Henry Purcell and Heinrich Bieber. Purcell, the Baroque English composer from the late 1600s, and Heinrich Bieber, the Austrian violinist of the late 1600s and early 1700s. Purcell was the organist and music director at Westminster Abbey, and Heinrich Bieber was a great experimenter. So these very contrasting pieces, written different places in Europe about the same time, 1676 or so, showing how the Baroque period was not a monolith. These were very different traditions. So what I think is interesting about that music is the form and the title are the same thing. The Passacaglia is the title of the piece, obviously, but it is also the idea of having a ground base, the idea of repetition and building variations on top of simple repetition. And this is called the lament, and it was a part of the Renaissance music. It was a lot in Purcell's music, and Bieber, obviously, and kind of skipped several centuries and ended up as a device, completely unrelated, of course, in folk music. So Eastern European folk music, but specifically, or at least most interestingly to me, American folk music, in particular the blues. So the lament is a fate motive. It is like a descent into something very serious and something life-changing. And so you hear... That's the opening of the Purcell, of the Bieber, but it's also in the Purcell. The idea of that falling forth is this kind of sigh-like gesture. And you hear it in Robert Johnson's Walking Blues. You hear it in Led Zeppelin ripping off Robert Johnson. And you hear it in My Guitar Gently Weeps by the Beatles, all those British bands that were incredibly influenced by African-American music from the South. I played this last night just to run through it on a different live stream, and a gentleman who was listening wrote in that it's also apparent in 16 Tons, the Tennessee Ernie Ford song. And I thought it's perfect because, of course, it is a lament, and it is the most resigned fate lyrics, and so you hear it in that, A Simple Twist of Fate by Bob Dylan. Anyway, that's all that is. So Purcell and Bieber wrote this enormous scaled music for solo violin in the 17th century and used kind of a sleight of hand of repetition as a way to add variety and scale and play with form. Bach took the same idea in the Chaconne, the epic D minor Chaconne, that cast an incredibly long shadow on every composer that came after. And this next piece by Missy Mazzoli was written in 2011 in Brooklyn, New York, but is still a offshoot of Bach's music. And unlike the Bieber, she uses a constantly unfolding, thematic material that's constantly unfolding with very little repetition to create a large form solo violin work. So this is Dissolve, Oh My Heart by Missy Mazzoli. So if you guys are anyone just joining us, this is the Rochester Philharmonic Musicians' new live stream series. We're going to be aiming to do this every Saturday night, coming in from a different living room or a different practice room from our homes to yours. If you have anyone that you think might be interested in hearing this, tag them in the comments. If you have any questions for me, put them in the comments and I will get them, or one of my colleagues will answer them. I'm new to the Rochester Philharmonic, or relatively new. I started here in September. I came here from the Louisville Orchestra in Kentucky, and while I was there I made a lot of great relationships, a lot of great friendships, but also some wonderful working relationships with composers. So I'm going to play a few pieces from Louisville that have obvious vernacular influences, but are also contemporary classical music. So the first piece is by a young man who's based in New York City. His name is Luke Sissel, but he is from Louisville, and he is an award-winning fiddle player and a wonderful composer. And he wrote a large set of pieces called Infinite Progress. But this is one movement, my favorite movement, called She Calls to Me, from Infinite Progress by Luke Sissel. Next is music by Jeremy Beck, who is a Louisville-based composer and a guy who writes incredibly beautiful, large form, what I would call neo-romantic music. But this one is kind of a driving, bluesy piece from a larger set of solo violin works called Passages, all about migration. This movement is called Crossing Mountains. Okay, so when I was leaving Louisville and I decided to make the move up here to Rochester, I got an email from someone whose name I recognized, but I had never actually met in person. The wife of one of my dear colleagues in the second violin second, Charlie Brestel. His wife recently retired as a lifelong music educator and began composing again. And because I had played a bunch of solo violin music, she decided to send me a couple wonderful pieces. Honestly, one of the most flattering things that ever happened in my career. So here's a short work, kind of like a mid-century and Webern scope, so kind of a little bit of Shostakovich and Webern mixed together. This is called Complicit by Sylvia Mancuso-Brestel. right, next is more music from Kentucky. This piece was written for me in 2015 by Daniel Gillen. And Daniel is a wonderful composer, wonderful artist, but he's also an on-air personality for classical music. He's a program director for WUOL, Louisville Public Media. And we worked on a number of projects together, but none more meaningful to me than this piece, which I've had the opportunity to play all across the country. Like Missy's work a few numbers ago, this is based on Bach, or inspired by Bach, but a very different, less edgy interpretation. So this is Music for Violin by Daniel Gillen. Okay, next is music by Astor Piazzolla, who was obviously the Argentinian tango composer, but born in New York City. And his great contribution, of course, was Nuevo Tango, which is a synthesis of American jazz and European chamber music and Argentinian tango. And late in his life, in the late 1980s, he wrote a set of tango etudes that are meant to institutionalize tango into the literature, so that if you pump it into the conservatory pipeline, it comes out on the other end, a part of the standard repertoire. So this is Tango Number 3 by Astor Piazzolla. Okay, guys, so I got one more for you tonight. But we are all facing a whole uncharted waters, and we know we're all navigating this together. If at some point in you find it possible to give to the Rochester Philharmonic in our dark time, we would be greatly appreciative of it. You can visit us at rpo.org/donate. Any amount is greatly appreciated. But I want you to remember that we're going to be doing this every Saturday night. Different members of the RPO playing music for you, different instruments, different settings. So kind of put that on your calendar. Make sure to follow the musicians of the Rochester Philharmonic if you aren't already. Louise, do we have any questions? Okay, no questions. All right, so tonight I've been playing on my primary instrument, which is an instrument from 1927. It's just a tad older than the Rochester Philharmonic, actually. And it comes from northern Italy, Reggio Emilia, and I'm incredibly lucky to have it. But for the last one, I'm going to play on this instrument. It was purchased by my grandmother at a flea market in Maine. And when I was in Louisville, people used to ask me all the time what the difference between a violin and a fiddle was. And the punchline of the joke is that it's how much beer the operators had but I actually think it's how hard a life the violin has had. And this violin has had a hard life. If you can, I don't know if you can see, but that's tape holding this together. That's not a street secret of Stradivari. That is Scotch tape. This violin is as much glue at this point as it is wood, I think. But it was born to play this piece, which is a piece by Kenji Bunch, the composer of the first number I played. It's in a cross tuning, which is an Appalachian fiddle tuning, but also a Scottish fiddle tuning. So it's kind of set up to play fiddle tunes. Makes it very convenient. It's actually quite ingenious. The name of this tune is called Until Next Time. And until next time, everyone stay safe. Stay 6 feet apart. I think that's what we're told to do. And we'll see you soon. Good night, everyone.